Welcome to the Future Self podcast. My name is Jonathon Zalakos, and I'm in my last year of a Design and Business Administration double degree at the Australian National University. I'm majoring in Jewellery and Object, and I'm very excited to be talking to Ezra Satok-Wolman, a very accomplished jewellery artist whose work has been exhibited around the world. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you.
Glad to hear it. Where are you right now? Are you in lockdown? How's the city vibe?
I'm in Toronto, Canada, and while the city has opened up again, my wife and I are still maintaining our semi-lockdown situation. I mean, we go out for the basics, the bare essentials, and that's it at this point.
Yeah, excellent. It's the same deal here. Masks outside is nice, but it's sort of flowing again, for better or for worse.
I'm cautiously optimistic.
That's the way. That's the way. Well, could you introduce yourself and what you do?
Okay, so my name is Ezra Satok-Wolman. I'm a jewelry artist. I work exclusively in jewelry. I've been working in this field for about 20 years, and I've had the good fortune of having studied in a few different countries, Canada, the US, Italy. I set up my own studio just outside of Toronto in 2009, and I've been working as an independent, an artist since then. So while I do work exclusively in jewelry, I don't necessarily make what you would consider traditional jewelry. I like to look at the stuff that I produce as small sculpture, or recently I've sort of delved into a little bit of a micro engineering project. But for the most part, everything that comes out of my studio is wearable. Call it what you like, but it is to adorn the body. And I absolutely love what I do.
Excellent. That's so great to hear. Could you expand a little bit on what you do, what the day-to-day life of a jewelry artist looks like?
I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so I'm work obsessed. I tend to have to make myself put things down and take breaks. Once I get going on a project, I'm pretty full steam. So I start my day walking my dog with my wife, who I think I mentioned in the pre-interview, we work together. So the two of us share the studio. We have some breakfast, we get going to work. And generally speaking, it's a day, depending on what the project is, full of, hands-on activity. I don't do any casting. I fabricate everything. Essentially working from alloying of metals to the finished product. Everything takes place in my studio, whether there are stones to be set or forging, smithing, you name it. If it's a hands-on process, we do it. And so essentially, that's the day is spent in the workshop. I haven't had much of a social life over the last 10 years. As I'm sure you know, it takes a long time to produce something that you're satisfied with, and I still am in a relatively early stage of my career. So the last decade, I've been focused on developing a body of work that is large enough that I can work with more than one gallery, and it takes time to get to that point.
That seems to what it really boils down to in developing a career in the field, is spending a lot of time getting the ball rolling and building the ball big enough to make it worth rolling.
For sure. I think, there are people who manage to make it work and juggle something else in addition to their jewelry practice or craft or arts practice. But I'm full-time, and I think I'm sure contributed to whatever success I've had has been because I've worked my butt off, and I've been determined to get my work out there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm curious about your shared space with your wife. Do you have a collaborative process, or is it sort of distinct to each maker?
So there are definitely projects where I require extra hands. There was my wife and I studied together as we were, trying to figure out what we wanted to do. So we went to school together in North America and then as well in Italy. But our paths diverged at a certain point, and she started to focus more on silversmithing and larger objects, and I stayed working with jewelry and basically creating smaller objects. So in our studio previously, because we haven't finished setting the new one up yet, she's had the section of the studio with all of the big hammers and anvils and stakes, and I've got my little tiny hammers and little miniature stakes over in my side of the studio. So we do definitely work together on certain things, and there are often times where she's collaborated with me on some of my pieces, where, for example, I use a lot of silk braided cords for the necklaces or pendants that I make. My wife, Jennifer, does all of the kumihimo braiding of those. And so there's always, somewhere that she fits into the puzzle.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm very excited to talk about more of the sort of international connections and education experiences that you've had. But just going back to square one, what was your introduction to jewelry, and how did you decide to pursue jewelry as a career? What was that journey?
It was sort of by chance. I've always been interested in the arts and being involved in making and craft. I was actually working with glass for a while. My wife and I had applied to summer program at a school in the United States called Haystack School of Arts in Deer Isle, Maine. The glass program historically is always booked up, and the school recommends that you choose a second choice when you're applying. So my wife had actually been already making jewelry when she was in university, and that was what she had decided she wanted to do at Haystack. So naturally, it was my second choice, and that's where I ended up that summer. And I never looked back. I fell in love with working with metal immediately. I'm pretty sure I very quickly got rid of any glass blowing equipment, and we started buying more jewelry making equipment. And it didn't take very long before we decided we'd both go back to school in a jewelry centric program at a college in Vancouver. And that was, at this point, I guess that was 19 years ago.
That's so interesting to hear that you started with glass, because I feel like so much of glass making processes are quite rapid, and compared to metalsmithing, which, unless you're casting, always feels really labored and quite slow. I'm curious about how you made that jump, or what struck out to you from metalsmithing.
It wasn't a difficult jump to make, because I felt, and not that I did very much studying with glass. I worked with a couple of people, as a sort of quasi-apprentice in their studios, and picked up a few things, but it was something that I always felt very limited by in terms of what you could do with it. And I guess there just wasn't a match between what I was trying to express and what the material was allowing me to do. So it also didn't help that I have a horrible, I don't know if you'd call it a phobia, but broken glass is something that just drives me absolutely crazy.
Oh, yeah.
So it wasn't going to be a good fit for me. Metal, it just seemed like something that I could connect with more easily. And, working with metal, making jewelry, there are so many layers to the process. It for me seems like something I can get more involved into. Whereas glass, I felt like I was always sort of, dancing around the restrictions and the limitations.
Right. A bit too much character in the process and in the material itself.
Perhaps, yeah. So yeah, so the transition was pretty easy, and I didn't really think twice about it, and we both were accepted into a program that we enjoyed thoroughly, and it was after we finished school in Vancouver that we decided we needed to take it a step further and continue our studies, and we moved to Florence, where our goal was to learn specifically techniques that were, classical goldsmithing techniques that were becoming harder and harder to find places that you could learn them from. So
yeah,
I started.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, that's like a really big milestone in your career, moving to Italy and trying to chase down that traditional craft practice, which is harder and harder to find. I'm curious about how you found that opportunity and how you took advantage of that.
Well, it was difficult, and it was early 2000s. Finding information about schools in Europe was not something that there was a lot of on the internet at the time. While some schools did have websites set up, they were few and far between, and we honed in on a couple of schools, Le Artiorife and Alchemia, and we decided that we'd actually travel to Florence and go and visit the schools, and we decided that it was something that we wanted to pursue, and it took about a year to prepare and study Italian at the University of British Columbia, and it was a long process, but in the end, we made it over there. It was very exciting. I mean, and we were at a school. We decided to go to Le Artiorife, and we were at a school with people who had come from, a dozen other countries, if not more. All of us had learned some level of Italian, and that became the common language, and it was an amazing experience. But we felt that that's what it was going to take in order to learn proper Florentine engraving or traditional stone setting techniques. That you were having a hard time at that time finding programs that were still able to teach these things in a classical and proper way. So I did a stone setting program. My wife Jennifer did an engraving program in addition to the goldsmithing program that was the sort of general diploma program at the school. And yeah, it was fantastic. It was there that we met Giovanni Corvaia, who is somebody that we were aware of and had already studied and admired his work. And he was at the time a visiting teacher that would come visit for 1 week out of every month and work with our class on a project that we had that we would work exclusively with him during that week on. Right. And we developed a relationship with him that led to us joining him for another 3 years at his studio in Umbria, where we worked and continued to develop our techniques and skills and find our direction as jewelry makers.
Yeah, that sounds like such an exciting opportunity all the way through. A lot of fun and a lot of joy, it seems like.
It was a hell of an adventure, that's for sure.
Oh yeah. And how did you have the confidence to take the steps to live out this adventure? Were you working a lot beforehand or had some savings ready to go? What was the...
Yeah, I was working all through school while we were in Vancouver and saving. I was lucky enough to have some support from my parents who helped us with the big move over there. It was challenging. There were definitely a lot of nights where while we were still wrapping up our studies and life in Vancouver, where I can remember having cans of beans for dinner and very basic menu selection. But we made it work, and we were lucky enough to have some parental support that made it possible.
Yeah, always helps. Okay. And over the span of your career, what are some more sort of milestones that sort of define the direction that you're heading in over time?
Well, I think the whole Italy experience really opened my eyes to what was at the time a fast-growing international community of jewelry makers, people who were focused on this new idea of contemporary jewelry. And having made it already to Italy and figured out how to speak another language and start to develop connections there, I put a lot of time once we came back to Canada in continuing to develop those international connections. And it was something that has really, I feel, benefited my career in a big way because it's opened the door for me in numerous countries where I've had the opportunity to participate in incredible events, whether it's been exhibiting my work or presenting as a lecturer, or even I've had the opportunity a couple of times to even help curate a couple of things. So having developed this network of people that I know throughout our field and around the world, it's given me a lot of amazing opportunities. You know, stepping out of my bubble and leaving my comfort zone was one of the best experiences and challenges I could have presented myself with.
Yeah, it's very exciting, very stimulating. And so it sounds like you drew a lot from the network and the people that you were sort of around as you were traveling. Did you have like specific mentors and advocates that really propelled you in your practice?
Well, yes. As I mentioned, Giovanni Corvaia has probably been the person who I credit most with mentoring me as a goldsmith. At the same time, I had a wonderful teacher when I was in Vancouver named Darius Babel, who sadly passed away a few years ago. But he was the person who really exposed me initially to what was going on in Europe historically with jewelry and what continued to be going on in Europe when I was a student, and he definitely helped guide me towards understanding that the college program that I was in at the time wasn't, it didn't have to be the last stop, and he really encouraged me to pursue more. And it was something I always appreciated very much because he clearly took an interest in me as a student and was a big influence. So,
yeah,
also, my father was a struggling artist while I was growing up, and my grandfather as well was a painter and actually was somewhat well known here in North America back in the 70s.
right.
So I've looked, to both their successes and failures, and they've definitely influenced me to follow my desire to be a creative. And in terms of specific influences, jewelry wise. I've really met so many amazing people who, beyond just their work itself, they as people have inspired me. There's an amazing jewelry artist in Japan named Keiwa Kobayashi, who I had the good fortune of meeting when I was in Japan a couple years ago, and we sat down for a day and basically geeked out and showed each other our work and talked about technique and shared ideas with each other. And it's experiences like that have really been, fuel for me to continue to drive me to, go out there and continue to try to be a part of this global community, which it's an amazing thing. There are amazing talented artists out there, and we have the luxury of being able to be connected this way through, whether it's through social media or physical experiences or interviews or listening to podcasts, whatever it may be. We're not all just working, tinkering away in our own little pockets anymore.
Yeah, yeah. But with that said, there's still a large element of personal drive and the initiative to pursue so many opportunities. With your involvement in like SNAG, the Society of North American Goldsmiths, and your lecturing and these sort of opportunities, are they a lot of the time sort of by application on your own initiative, or do you have like an in or?
The SNAG, my relationship with them started in 2013. I had been a member, but I was approached by Brigida Martin to join a committee. At the time, it was a committee that was specifically focused on creating content for the annual SNAG conference and specifically for what they were calling at the time the Professional Development Seminar. So I was asked to join this committee and help develop content for the seminar that was held during the conference every year. And it was after having worked on that committee for a couple of years that the executive director approached me about running for a board position, which I did decide to do, and I served on the board of directors for 3 years. I guess it's clearly by volunteer. I chose to volunteer my time, but was asked to participate and was happy to do so.
Yeah, that's great. I love that mix as well. I'm curious about your practice as it is. How has it evolved over your career? Has it largely been sort of an observation of external stimulus, or has it been an internal process of evolution?
Well, in terms of, I guess specifically with respect to what drives me to make the work that I make, I would say it is somewhat external and much to do with observations that I make or questions that I might have that are based on observations that I make about the world or the universe. I tend to make pieces that are at times my perceived models of how I envision the universe, its form, its shape. It's often something that I've seen somewhere that gives me an idea that, balloons into something else. I've studied a lot of wildflowers that I've observed the Fibonacci sequence in. I jump from there to the same shapes that are seen in spiral galaxies, and it's sort of that leap that goes from a little simple flower that I might see out on a walk to the formation of galaxies and how that converts into a piece of jewelry. That's basically the process in a very rough nutshell.
So it's been pretty consistent.
Based on external observations that are then internalized and then stretched to the nth degree.
Okay, great. And has that sort of been your resolve in your process since early on, or has it been that adding and adding?
Yeah, no, I think I've always had a desire to understand our place in the universe, and I've figured out a way that I'm comfortable with translating that into something visual and something tangible and something wearable. So it is something. It's something that I've been sort of stuck with this whole time, that I've figured out a way to express.
Yeah. Okay. And I'm really interested in how you sort of combine that expression with jewelry in the mind and wearability, because a lot of the time I feel like jewelry is sort of deterministic in its forms, like you decide you're going to be making a ring or a brooch or a pendant. I'm curious about your approach to, twisting jewelry into that.
Okay, so that is probably the biggest challenge that a jewelry maker faces, finding a way to synthesize your concept, your idea, your vision into something that is functional. And it's a big challenge. And I guess what I'm trying to say is it's easy to miss the mark. And, a successful piece of jewelry, a contemporary jewelry where, it isn't just about it being a piece of jewelry, but rather a piece of jewelry that's also trying to convey something beyond it just being a piece of jewelry, being able to successfully synthesize those things together, it's a tremendous challenge. So
Yeah.
I don't know whether I succeed all the time or not, but
Okay.
it's my goal, and I hope that if I am able to put that idea onto somebody's body and still have that idea presentable in the same way on or off the body, to me, I'm happy with that.
And I think that your work, it really stands out, in my opinion, because it really does show that quality, and it's something that I appreciate in referencing your work and sort of working towards in my own practice. It's really valuable to see.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
And so on that note, I'm really interested in that background of the science and the philosophy that you integrate into your practice. Could you talk more about the direct process of converting these conceptual and intellectual concepts into a visual reference and sort of drawing that out?
That is a good question. I'll try to answer that. So, for me, I rarely draw anything. I see things in my head. I even break them down mechanically in my head, part by part, and I go from there and I build. And oftentimes I'll, sketch out a little part to see if something needs to change here or there. But at the end of the day, I go from something that I see in my head to starting to figure out measurements and materials, and there are often times where I can't make that jump, and the piece does not reach completion.
Right.
And it's usually early on where I realize that this isn't going to go the way I want it to go, which is good because it saves me a lot of time in the long run. But it's the way that I work, and perhaps I might be more effective or efficient if I did try to draw things out. But I find that something gets lost when I try to put these things from my head down on paper, and so it's never worked for me. So so it's often something that develops as I go along, and while the end result might not be exactly what I envisioned in my head, I hope that I get it pretty close in the finished piece. And so part of that has to do because, as I mentioned, I fabricate everything. I don't model things on paper or using 3D programs. So part of my determination in my studies was to try to learn, absolutely everything that I possibly could stomach learning, so that when I got back to my own studio, if there was something that I needed to do, there was a good chance I'd be able to figure out how to do that on my own with my own two hands and the equipment that I had in my studio.
Wow.
My ideas about that are starting to change. But again, I tend to try to just sort of take that vision and put it into material, and that's what you see in terms of the body of work that I've produced since I started posting things out there. Those are just sort of born from my head and into metal. The thought that goes into them, the research, whether it's been something that I've made based on an idea I've had about Pythagoras, or a particular geometric shape, or a particular cosmic body. That is a whole other discussion on its own. And, I think it would be kind of hard to explain, where all of that comes from. But
yeah.
I hope in some ways I've answered part of your question.
It really does. I feel like conceptually it's a pretty strong theme that a lot of the visuals are emergent from your just thinking about these concepts. It makes a lot of sense. But I am shocked to hear that you say that you don't use any 3D modeling or like really planning a lot of your pieces, because they're sort of immaculate in their mathematical composition.
I will admit, and it's not that I was trying to hide it, but I forget sometimes that occasionally when I'm laying out a hole pattern for drilling holes, I use very rudimentary. I used to work as a graphic artist, so I use Photoshop and Illustrator, and I might lay out a hole pattern in Illustrator and then print it on a piece of paper and apply that to a surface of metal so that I have a guide for a hole pattern or something like that. But beyond some basic two-dimensional hole arrangements or things like that, it's a pretty basic. I work as a classic goldsmith, and I use hammers, and I use files, and I use stakes and dapping blocks, and I work with metal. And while I am tempted to go down that road with CAD, and it's something that I have looked into, especially during this lockdown period.
Yeah.
It's just something that I haven't needed so much just yet. But I have ideas that I think it could be helpful with. So it's something I'm leaving the door open for.
Yeah, because some of your newer work has involved some 3D printed components, the titanium links, which I love the construction of all that. And I also appreciate a big divergence, or a considered divergence, from some archetypal jewelry forms with the glovelet and the objects in that series. I think those are great.
Thank you. That was a big shift, and it did require CAD. I had to seek some professional help to tweak the model for the little titanium components, which were produced by a company through direct metal laser sintering 3D printing. And it is the first time I've used a CAD process for any of my projects. And I was really happy to be able to, because when I started out making those little components, I was actually soldering little tubes together. And when I calculated that to make the initial first bracelet, I would need 370 of those components, I immediately knew that I would be an old man by the time I actually finished the first one, and I had to go a different path. So it has served me well, for sure.
Okay, great. Wonderful. And with that body of work, the titanium pieces, there's also a video component. And sort of a lot of paraphernalia around the exhibition. I'm curious if you could talk about that and
where it stemmed from in jewelry.
There's, of course, my fascination with space. The project stemmed from my frustration with the amount of effort, time, and money that is being put into this idea of colonizing Mars. I know it's not necessarily the first thing that you'd expect as a driving force behind the project when you just scratch the surface, but the idea behind the project was to use this sex robot, which was featured in the video, as a metaphor for Mars being this new relationship we were trying to establish with a cold, lifeless, synthetic potential existence. And in the video, I try to portray this sort of dystopian scenario where humans are relegated to living in these these cold, lifeless bubbles with essentially, sex robots to occupy themselves with, and that it's essentially a choice that we're making, rather than putting that energy, time, and focus into saving our own planet, which is a legitimate, healthy, and wonderful relationship that we're currently in.
A living thing.
So the idea did start from one little discussion that I don't remember actually what started it, but I had this idea that these sex robots certainly needed jewelry too, and it just so happened that I was working on some jewelry that seemed pretty damn fitting for a sex robot, and so I continued to sort of develop the idea from there. And I happen to have a very good friend who is in the film industry, who liked the idea very much of shooting this video. And it took some string pulling, but we managed to find an astronaut suit and a very talented cinematographer who hooked us up with some great equipment. The whole project was supported by anybody that we put it in front of, and we ended up having the studio where we shot the video at was donated. A film studio sponsored us and provided us with the robotic arm camera equipment that was required. And 17 people volunteered their time to work on this as the required crew. We shot it in 18 hours, a long day. And it was certainly the most interesting jewelry project I've been involved with yet. Sure not the last, but it was different.
Yeah, very engaging. I loved it. I was wondering if you could just touch on how the coronavirus has impacted your career right now, your work, and then any implications or consequences you think it might have. Well,
in some ways, I feel fortunate in that last summer, my wife and I moved from a rural part of Ontario back to the city of Toronto. And unfortunately, we've had some complicating factors that have occurred since then that have caused us to move again. So it had delayed the process of getting my studio up and running. And while construction was underway, the lockdown prevented us from being able to finish it throughout the spring. So I'm at the moment without studio, and while on one hand I'm happy that I've sort of had these two things overlap, where I haven't necessarily been concerned all that much about the delay in the studio and where we're living necessarily, because we've been worried about surviving and our families, and but at the same time, it's also been very frustrating because I've seen all of my friends and colleagues spend their time incredibly wisely and productively in their studios over the past few months. And not that anybody would wish for something like this, but if there's one thing that an artist or a craftsperson wants, it's to be told to stay in their studio and don't come out. So while I'm sure I could have done all sorts of stuff had I had a studio up and running during this period of time, it's also been a period of time where I am shifting gears and sort of closing the book on one chapter and opening another. And in that respect, I haven't really minded the little bit of the reset that I've had. So it's been a little while since I've actually worked in the studio. But at the same time, I now have a battery full of ideas and energy and things that I want to get going as soon as I get in there. So in the end, I think I fared pretty well through coronavirus. I'm still here, and we were just trying to stay safe and hope that everybody else is staying smart and safe, and that some sort of normalcy can be resumed down the road.
Yeah, yeah, wonderful. And on that note of new pages and a battery full of ideas, what are some upcoming highlights for your practice? What's exciting happening in the future?
Well, as most of my colleagues have experienced, a number of events were canceled or postponed. So it does leave a number of exciting things on the horizon when things do start getting back on track. But I'm starting fresh in a new studio, and for me that that presents the opportunity to really try to do some things that maybe before I didn't make the time for, or didn't want to take the risk to do, or whatever it may have been. I'm going to make myself take the plunge and try those things that have been on the side burner for a while. So I'm excited to get back to work, because it's been about a year since I've finished a piece.
Right. Wow.
So for me, that's a long time. I don't break very often, and if I do travel, it tends to be work related. So this has been a big pause for me. So I'm amped and ready to go.
Excellent. Well, I'm excited to see the outcomes from that. Thank you so much for your time, Ezra. I really appreciate you doing this interview. It was great to talk to you, and I'm really excited. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, and I really enjoyed talking with you as well. And I love the chain video, by the way. It's awesome.
Cheers.
Very well done. Very well done.
It's Ivana Ho here, producer of the Future Self podcast, and I'm here with Jonathon Zalakos, who has just done an incredible job talking to Ezra. Jonathan, why was it that you chose to speak to him?
I chose Ezra because he was one of the jewelry artists whose work I first found, and something clicked, and I was like, okay, this is bigger than what I thought it was, the whole field. And so it was a bit of a Hail Mary to throw his name out there, but yeah, having the opportunity to talk to him was incredibly exciting.
And was there anything in particular that he said that you have found the most helpful in pursuing your own jewelry making career?
I think his drive to pursue further opportunities in education, like learning a language a year before deciding to go to Italy and, do a couple years course there and then end up with an apprenticeship under Giovanni. I think that's a big takeaway. There's so much effort that you can put into it.
Has he inspired you to make that trip to Italy now?
I'll think about it. Maybe South Korea, somewhere big.
Well, all the best with your own jewelry career, and thank you for doing this interview for Future Self.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It was a lot of fun.